There's one particular mystery in the Wyatt Earp story that just really bugs me, okay? But I can finally say with some satisfaction, and to my way of thinking, it's been solved. And this is that story. In March of 1882, Wyatt Earp was in a bad way. Not only had his financial stake that he was counting on in Tombstone to pay off, not only was that gone, but his favorite brother was murdered on March 18th. And his older brother was seriously wounded in the altercation that, the misdemeanor arrest that went awry on October 26th. Well, his brother Virgil ended up being ambushed on December 28th, and he had so much buckshot in his elbow that they had to saw his arm above the elbow and below and then put it back together. That's how bad that was. So now he had two brothers in dire straits, and he was Wyatt Earp accompanied the train to Tucson so they could take the body of Morgan back to California. And he felt they were being ambushed by Ike Clanton and Frank Stillwell. He ended up waylaying Frank Stillwell and killing him. And as soon as he did that, he was outside of the law. And he went back to Tombstone to settle up his affairs. And he thought he would try to take as many of his enemies with him as he could. He found Florentino Cruz at South Pass and killed him. He was allegedly the lookout in the murder of Morgan. And now, on March 24th, he is on his way to meet a courier to pick up some money from Gage, the mining magnate, to be able to finance his vendetta ride so he could get out clean. And he left Warren on the trail on the coming from Charleston, and he took his vendetta, the rest of the vendetta riders. That would be Doc Holliday, Sherm McMasters, Turkey Creek Johnson, and Texas Jack Vermillion, and they started to ride up the trail toward a spring, Iron Springs, where he had heard that there may be some criminals there, or that he was going to camp for the night. He wanted to check that out. And so as he rode up the canyon, he gave this version, okay, of the approach. And I need to read it from the book. This is from Frontier Marshal by Stuart Lake. This is the book that made Wyatt Earp's fame. And I have to read you this because it's important to where we're going. About 100 yards from the waterhole, the trail rounded a rocky shoulder and cut across a flat shelf of deep sand. Ahead, Iron Springs was hidden by an eroded bank, possibly 15 feet high. Beyond the hollow, where the mountain slope resumed, was a grove of cottonwoods, and between this grove and the waterhole was an abandoned shack hidden from view from the bluff. All right, that's the setup told by Wyatt Earp himself, and this is important. What happens next is very controversial. I'll keep it brief because the fight itself is contested by all sides. But basically, Wyatt Earp was in the lead. It was a hot day. He loosened his gun belt because it was uncomfortable, actually both. And he unbuttoned his jacket and he was riding. And about 50 feet from the edge of the spring, he had a premonition. And he got off his horse, he took the reins in his left hand, and he pulled out his shotgun, and he stepped forward. As soon as he did, he saw two men, and he recognized them both. The first one was Curly Bill Brocious, the leader of the Cowboys, and the second guy was Pony Deal, also one of the Cowboys, an immortal enemy of Earp. Both Curly Bill, who had a sawed-off shotgun, they both raised their weapons and fired almost simultaneously as Pony Deal ran. And according to Earp, the buckshot fired by Curly Bill sprayed his the skirt of his coat, and he had holes in it, which he found later. And Wyatt Earp's aim was a little better, and he hit Curly Bill below the chest and almost ripped him in half, according to Earp. Well, as this had happened, his compadres behind him, including Doc Holliday, turned and fled at the first fire, and Wyatt Earp was on foot now. And what had happened was, because he'd loosened his gun belt, he couldn't remount his horse because the gun belt had slipped down around his ankles. And so now he couldn't work the horse. And so he's there and people are firing at him. He's firing back. And in the Stuart Lake telling, which is the Frontier Marshal version, he has quite a gunfight, and he claims that he could recognize 7 of the other cowboys who came bursting out of the line shack, and he was able to hit 2 of them, and he names them all. He said he had warrants for all of them. And if you're like me, your BS meter's starting to go a little bit. It's either total BS or it's perhaps molasses on a cow chip. I don't know. This part of the story is very, very hard to swallow, and I don't know how much of it is Stuart Lake building it up, and how much of it is Earp maybe trying to gild the lily a little bit. But that's not our important thing here today. What we really want to know is where this took place. So let me finish up the story. Earp tries to remount his horse, and one of the bullets from the cowboys takes off his saddle horn, and it was that close. And he said his nose right. He said it smelled like a burnt egg. I love little details like that. He finally mounts his horse and is able to rejoin Doc Holliday and the others. And they say, "Are you hit?" And he says, "My left leg is numb." And so Wyatt Earp thought he had been wounded in the exchange. But they got to looking at him, and he claimed that they couldn't find a bullet hole in him, and they ended up finding the bullet had lodged in the heel of his boot, and it just had kind of stunned him and numbed him for the moment. He claimed that he had several bullet holes in the crown of his hat and in the brim of his hat. He claimed he had 3 bullet holes in his pants leg, and so the idea that Wyatt Earp lived his whole life and never got a scratch, it really pushes the limit on this. But it is true, he was not wounded in this fight. And then the wounded party, Texas Jack Vermillion, his horse was killed in the exchange and fell on him, and he was trying to extricate himself and get out from under it, and he wanted to get all of his gear because he has his saddle and everything, and so he was able to extricate his gear. And so now they're shy a horse, and they limp up to Henry Clay Hooker's ranch, which is north of Wilcox, if you know the Cochise County area very well. Benson and Wilcox is north of there. And they spent a couple days there. They had almost an encounter with the Behan posse. Wyatt Earp had two posses out after him, full of his enemies. Behan had deputized Ike Clanton and his brother Finn, and they also deputized John Ringo. So basically, it was the cowboy posse chasing them, and they knew exactly what would happen if they were caught. So they had 2 posses after them. A couple days after their stay, and they got new horses and stuff, they took off for Silver City, New Mexico, which is a long hike if you've ever driven it, and much less on a horseback. And they sold their horses in Silver City. They took the stage to Deming, New Mexico. They took the train from there to Albuquerque, where they spent, I believe, 2 weeks. And then they fled to Colorado and escaped jurisdiction and most probably hanging. Now we'll fast forward. In March of 1980, I bought a topo map from Wide World of Maps in West Phoenix, and I took a very pregnant wife. Kathy Sue was 8.5 months pregnant with our first daughter. And I took a borrowed truck, and we drove to Cochise County because I wanted to actually walk this site and see Iron Springs, where Wyatt Earp took on Curly Bill. I'm a huge fan of being able to see these places, and I've always done that. Whether it's Sinking Springs, New Mexico, or Canyon de los Embudos in Mexico, where Geronimo almost surrendered to Crook, or whether it's the Little Bighorn in Montana, where I had a fabulous tour of the Custer Battlefield with Jim Hatzel. I'm just really a proponent of you have to walk where they walk. So there I was. We went down there, and we had to get permission to go on the Sands Ranch. It's on private property. And Les Shannon was the ranch foreman, and he was a very nice guy. And he told me the directions on how to get up there. And so we had to park the car and we had to walk. And my wife was 8.5 months pregnant. This was not easy for her, but I was so excited. And I got up to Iron Springs and looked at it on the topo. And I was so disappointed because it did not match Wyatt Earp's description from the book. There was no sandy shelf. There was no cottonwoods. There was no way that you could be there and not see something. You could see all the way across the San Pedro Valley, all the way to the hills of Tombstone. And so I was very disturbed by this. And I thought, wow, this can't be right. But all my life, I've heard that this fight took place at Iron Springs slash Mescal Springs. They're interchangeable. And as a matter of fact, on the topo, Mescal Springs is right next to it. So it either one, it didn't work. Okay. Now, fast forward to 1993, and I decided to bring some of the Wyatt Earp experts that I knew out there. And so we're meeting in Tombstone, and we went out for the afternoon to find Iron Springs and see what they thought. And I had some of the preeminent Earp historians with me, which included John Boesnecker, Alan Barra, Jeff Morey, Paul Andrew Hutton was not there. Who else do we have there? Oh, Fred Nolan was there, who's not an Earp guy. But I mean, I took some heavyweights out there. These are historians, okay? KCT Fertiller, that I mentioned, that he was there. And they all agreed with me. This does not fit. This does not fit the narration that Earp at all. Where's the sandy shelf? Where's the 15-foot berm? Where's the cottonwoods? For that matter, where's the line shack where the cowboys burst out of? So now we go forward another 22 years, and in the summer of 2002, a helicopter pilot named Bill Evans, who moved to Sierra Vista, he had a stagecoach business in Tombstone for a short while, but he basically lived in Sierra Vista, and he was as interested in this story as I am and all of my Wyatt Earp friends, historians. So anyway, he got real serious about it. And since he lived nearby, he had two ATVs. He took his youngest son, David, was 15 at the time. And for that whole summer, they transported themselves across the Mustang Mountain whetstones from Sonoyta east, going west from the San Pedro. And they looked everywhere, not just for a spring, but just for something that would match the narrative in Wyatt Earp's story. And 2 months later, they were ready to give up. And Bill tells the story fantastically. He says that on his last run through, they were going eastbound on the two ATVs. And he went down the west side of this creek and crossed over. And he went up on a berm and he stopped to wait for his son. And he looked back over his shoulder, and his son came up, and all of a sudden his mouth was taken open, and he realized there were some cottonwood trees, and he couldn't see the spring. And he thought, oh my goodness. And they looked around and they saw Lone Mountain, which is not really Lone Mountain on the maps, but Earp refers to it. And everybody in the area knows that that's the mountain he's referring to. And it was on the right side when you're at Mescal and Iron Springs, it doesn't match the narrative, but now it did. And as it turns out, it was at Cottonwood Springs, totally understandable. In fact, Les Shannon, the ranch foreman, thinks that the three springs, Cottonwood, Mescal, and Iron, are all fed by the same aquifer. And so Bill invited a bunch of us out. We all trekked up there, and it was so exciting to see, because you can go across that sandy shelf and you cannot see that someone is down camped beyond the berm. Only at the last couple of minutes, when you get there, you see it, and the cottonwood trees are there, and there's even a rock a building up on the side of the hill. We're not sure that that's the actual building that was there at the time, but it totally matches the narrative. And as Bill said, isn't it funny, when you're about to give up, then that's when you find it. And it's just so great. I'm just so happy for him. I'm so proud of him, because it proves that there's so much history yet to be solved. And thank you, Bill Evans, for discovering this one. And we can finally put this to sleep. The fight with Wyatt Earp and Curly Bill took place at Cottonwood Springs. So there. Hey, if you like this video and want to see more of that, comment down below. It really helps, okay? And be sure to hit the subscribe button down below and click on the bell next to it. For Bob Bell, click on the bell, okay?